Get back! Get back now!" Emma Collins shouted, her voice echoing through the narrow canyon. But the only response she got was laughter. The scorching Nevada sun hung high above the Red Rock mountain range, where a secret U.S. Marine Corps operation was underway. At just 21 years old, Emma had arrived at Captain Michael Reeves' Special Operations Unit only 3 days earlier, and from the very beginning, most of the veterans treated her like an outsider. Sergeant Tom Brenner joked that she looked more like a college student than a Marine, while others laughed and questioned why command had assigned her to an elite team filled with combat veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. During the first 2 days, the unit conducted reconnaissance missions through the rugged desert terrain, preparing for a high-risk objective hidden deep in the mountains. On the 3rd day, however, command unexpectedly changed the route and ordered the team through a narrow canyon that local rangers usually avoided. As the Marines descended between towering rock walls, Emma suddenly froze. Something felt wrong. Along the right slope, she noticed a strange line of small stones that seemed unnaturally arranged, as if someone had recently moved them into place. To everyone else, they were just rocks. To Emma, they were a warning sign. She remembered the lessons her father, a former U.S. Army combat engineer, had taught her as a child. He had spent years teaching her how to read terrain, how to spot disturbances that most people would never notice. Looking closer, she saw several desert bushes bent at odd angles, and a faint strip of freshly disturbed soil running between the rocks. Someone had been here recently. Someone had worked very hard to hide their tracks. Emma's heart began to race. She immediately approached Captain Reeves and urged him to stop the advance, explaining that the canyon showed signs of a carefully prepared trap. Before she could finish, Sergeant Brenner burst out laughing. The other Marines joined in, joking that she was seeing ghosts in the desert. Emma tried again, pointing out the disturbed terrain and warning that something was wrong. But her concerns were drowned out by sarcasm and jokes. Captain Reeves hesitated for a moment before ordering the team to continue moving forward. As the Marines pushed deeper into the canyon, Emma felt a growing sense of dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that disaster was waiting just ahead.
A few minutes later, the canyon narrowed so much that the team was forced to move almost single file. An eerie silence surrounded them. There were no birds, no insects, nothing, and that frightened Emma more than anything. Her father had once told her that when nature suddenly goes silent, danger is already nearby. She scanned the cliffs one more time and suddenly caught a tiny metallic glint high on the rocky slope. At that exact moment, the ground exploded beneath the lead element. A massive fireball erupted from under the rocks, hurling Marines through the air as a deafening shock wave ripped through the canyon. Screams echoed between the cliffs. Radio communications instantly died. Huge boulders crashed down from above, sealing off the escape routes. In a matter of seconds, the highly trained Marine unit found itself trapped inside a deadly kill zone. Dazed by the explosion, Captain Reeves lifted his head and saw Emma already running forward, shouting orders with a confidence that sounded nothing like the nervous newcomer everyone had mocked. And for the first time, he began to wonder if the biggest mistake they had made wasn't entering the canyon, but ignoring her warning when they still had the chance.
The shock wave was still rolling through the canyon when Emma Collins sprang into action. Thick clouds of dust filled the air, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Massive rocks continued crashing down from the cliffs, and terrified shouts echoed through the narrow passage. 2 Marines were wounded, another lay unconscious near the collapsed trail, and radio communications were reduced to static. The entrance behind them was blocked by tons of fallen rock, while the route ahead had disappeared beneath a wall of debris. For a few terrifying moments, chaos ruled the canyon. Captain Michael Reeves struggled to regain his bearings after the blast when a new sound cut through the confusion. Automatic gunfire erupted from high above. Bullets slammed into the rocks around them, sending fragments of stone flying in every direction. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately lured them into the canyon, detonated the explosives, and was now attacking from prepared positions on the cliffs. The Marines immediately returned fire, but the enemy remained nearly invisible among the rocks. Sergeant Tom Brenner shouted that they needed to push forward before they were completely surrounded, but Emma grabbed his vest and pointed toward a section of the slope. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed a thin cable running between several rocks.
Another explosive charge, a much larger one. If the team advanced exactly where the enemy expected them to, the second explosion would bury them alive. For the first time since meeting Emma, Brenner's expression changed. The confidence and sarcasm disappeared from his face. Emma quickly explained that the first blast had only been designed to funnel them into a second kill zone. She had seen similar tactics while studying old combat engineering reports with her father. Whoever planned this operation knew exactly how trained soldiers would react under pressure. Captain Reeves listened carefully as Emma pointed out more details hidden in the terrain. The canyon walls were scarred with fresh marks from recently moved rocks. Small piles of gravel had been intentionally placed to conceal wires. Everything had been prepared in advance. Meanwhile, the enemy fire intensified. Bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls. One Marine cried out as a round struck his shoulder. Another narrowly avoided a sniper shot that shattered the rock beside his head. Despite the chaos, Emma remained focused. She raised her binoculars and began scanning the cliffs. Within seconds, she located 3 separate firing positions. Then she spotted something even more dangerous. A sniper hidden nearly half a mile away, perfectly concealed among the rocks. She relayed the coordinates, and the Marines concentrated their fire. Moments later, one of the enemy positions fell silent. Captain Reeves stared at her in disbelief. While seasoned combat veterans struggled to locate targets, Emma seemed to see everything. But the worst news was yet to come. As she continued observing the surrounding mountains, she noticed movement on a distant ridgeline. At first, she thought it was a small patrol. Then more figures appeared, and more. Through the binoculars, she counted at least 50 armed men moving toward the canyon. Her stomach tightened. The explosion had only been the beginning. The main assault force was still coming. If they reached the canyon before the Marines escaped, there would be no way out. Emma lowered her binoculars and looked directly at Captain Reeves. Gunfire echoed around them. Wounded Marines were calling for help, and dust filled the air, but her voice remained calm and steady. "Captain," she said, "if we stay here another 10 minutes, none of us are getting home." And for the first time since the operation began, Michael Reeves didn't argue. He simply nodded, because deep down, he knew she was right.
Captain Michael Reeves looked at Emma for only a few seconds, but it was enough for him to make a decision. Just an hour earlier, he probably would have ignored her warning. Now, she had already saved the team twice from certain death. Gunfire echoed through the canyon, rocks continued crashing from the cliffs, and the enemy was slowly tightening the noose around them. Reeves quickly gathered his squad leaders and ordered everyone to follow Emma's plan. For many of the Marines, it was a shock. The same young woman they had laughed at only days before was now the person leading their way out of the trap. Emma explained that she had noticed signs of an old emergency mining route hidden along the northern wall of the canyon. The passage no longer appeared on modern maps, but she had recognized several rusted support anchors embedded in the rock. If the teen could reach that route before the enemy closed in, they might still escape. The problem was that a large open section of terrain separated them from the hidden passage. Anyone crossing it would be exposed to enemy fire from 3 different directions. One mistake could cost dozens of lives. While Captain Reeves organized the movement, Emma continued scanning the surrounding mountains through her binoculars. That was when she noticed something strange.
On a distant ridge stood a lone man holding powerful optics and a satellite antenna. Unlike the others, he wasn't shooting, he wasn't shouting orders. He simply watched the battle unfold. Something about him felt wrong. Every instinct told Emma this wasn't just another fighter. This man was commanding the entire operation. She reported her observation to Reeves, but at the moment he had more immediate concerns than a single observer on a distant hill. Their survival depended on reaching the escape route. Yet Emma couldn't stop thinking about the man. His calm behavior didn't match the chaos below. It was as if he already knew exactly how everything would end. Minutes later, the Marines began their breakout. Moving from cover to cover, they advanced across the exposed terrain while exchanging fire with enemy positions hidden in the cliffs. Bullets snapped through the air. One Marine was hit in the shoulder. Another narrowly escaped a sniper round that shattered the rock inches from his head. Despite the danger, the team slowly pushed forward toward the hidden passage. Then Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. The mysterious man on the distant ridge was leaving his observation post. He wasn't retreating in panic. He was moving with confidence, as though his job there was already finished. Suddenly, Emma understood. If the commander was abandoning his position before the battle was over, it meant he knew the Marines were heading exactly where he wanted them to go. The hidden passage wasn't their escape route. It was the next stage of the trap. Emma grabbed Captain Reeves and pointed toward the area ahead. Reeves raised his scope and focused on the location. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, one of several large metal containers hidden among the rocks suddenly opened. Armed men began pouring out. Then another container opened, and another. Dozens of fighters emerged from concealed positions, taking up defensive lines directly in front of the route the Marines intended to use. Reeves felt his stomach drop. The ambush in the canyon had only been the first layer. Ahead waited an even larger force prepared to finish the job. The enemy commander had predicted their every move. As the hidden army deployed across the mountainside, Emma realized they were trapped between 2 deadly forces. Behind them waited the original ambush teams. Ahead stood an entire strike force. And somewhere in the distance, the man who had planned it all was watching and smiling, convinced that this time there would be no escape. Captain Michael Reeves felt a chill run down his spine as he watched dozens of armed fighters emerge from the hidden containers. The route that was supposed to save his team had become another carefully prepared death trap. The enemy commander had predicted every move. Behind them waited the original ambush teams. Ahead stood a fresh force of heavily armed men blocking the only visible escape route. For the first time during the operation, even the most experienced Marines realized how close they were to total destruction. Radio communications remained unstable, air support was still far away, and ammunition was running low. Sergeant Tom Brenner gripped his rifle and quietly admitted that they had walked straight into a perfectly designed kill zone. Only hours earlier, he would have laughed at Emma's warnings. Now he was waiting for her next observation, because she was the only person who seemed capable of seeing what everyone else missed. While the Marines prepared defensive positions, Emma continued studying the battlefield through her binoculars. Her eyes moved across the terrain, searching for anything unusual. Then she noticed something strange. One of the metal containers stood slightly apart from the others. No guards were protecting it. No fighters were using it for cover. Around it were dozens of large fuel drums disguised beneath camouflage netting and construction debris. Most people would have ignored them. Emma immediately understood what she was seeing. It wasn't a supply container, it was the fuel reserve supporting the entire operation. If it exploded, it would ignite everything around it. She quickly showed Captain Reeves. At first he wasn't convinced. Then he looked through his scope and saw exactly what Emma had seen. Fuel, ammunition, vehicles, everything stored in one vulnerable location. The problem was the distance. The fuel depot sat more than 700 yards away across open terrain filled with enemy fighters. Any shot would have to be nearly perfect. A miss would expose their position and waste their only chance. Emma calmly asked for a sniper rifle. The Marines exchanged glances. Just a few days earlier, none of them would have trusted her with such a responsibility. Now nobody objected. A veteran sniper silently handed her his rifle. Emma moved behind a large boulder and settled into position. Around her, bullets slammed into rocks and enemy fire echoed through the mountains. But inside her scope, everything became still. She focused on a single metal valve attached to one of the fuel drums. The wind shifted constantly. Dust reduced visibility. The target was tiny. Most marksmen would never attempt the shot. Captain Reeves watched without speaking. Sergeant Brenner stood beside him, barely breathing. Every Marine in the unit understood that their lives depended on what happened next. Emma slowly exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked across the canyon. For a moment, nothing happened. 1 second passed, then 2. Suddenly, a small flame appeared near the fuel drums. A fraction of a second later, a massive explosion tore through the mountainside. Fire erupted across the entire fuel depot. One container exploded after another. Ammunition cooked off in violent chain reactions. Vehicles were launched into the air. Huge fireballs rolled across enemy positions, throwing fighters in every direction. The shock wave shook the canyon and sent burning debris raining from the sky. Within moments, an entire section of the enemy force had been wiped out. The Marines stared in disbelief. One shot had completely changed the battle. The carefully prepared defensive line was gone. The enemy formation collapsed into chaos as survivors scrambled for cover. For the first time all day, the Marines had a real chance to escape. But while everyone else watched the explosions, Emma focused on something far more troubling. Through the smoke and fire, she found the mysterious commander again. He was standing on a distant ridge, watching the destruction through binoculars. And to Emma's surprise, he wasn't angry. He wasn't retreating. He wasn't even concerned. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. At that moment, Emma realized something terrifying. The fuel depot had never been the enemy's real plan, and the man on the ridge wanted her to destroy it. The flames were still raging across the mountainside when Emma Collins realized the horrifying truth. The fuel depot had never been the enemy's real objective. It was bait. The mysterious commander on the ridge had expected someone to notice it. He had expected someone skilled enough to take the shot, and the moment Emma saw the smile on his face, she knew she had done exactly what he wanted. "Captain, this isn't over!" she shouted, grabbing Michael Reeves before he could order the team forward. Around them, the Marines were already preparing to move through the gap created by the explosion. To everyone else, the enemy seemed broken. Fighters were retreating, smoke covered the battlefield, and the defensive line had collapsed. It looked like victory. But Emma's instincts screamed otherwise. She quickly raised her binoculars and scanned the terrain beyond the burning fuel depot. Then she saw it. Hidden behind the smoke were several armored trucks that had remained invisible before the explosion. They had been concealed inside a natural depression in the mountain, completely protected from view. The fuel depot had acted like a curtain, blocking anyone from noticing what was behind it. Now the fire had revealed the real threat. More than 100 armed men were gathering around the vehicles, preparing for a final assault. The enemy commander had sacrificed part of his force to lure the Marines into exposing themselves. If Reeves ordered an advance now, his entire team would walk directly into the deadliest phase of the ambush. Captain Reeves looked through his scope and immediately understood. "Everyone hold your positions," he yelled over the radio. Several Marines froze in place just seconds before moving into the open. A moment later, heavy machine guns erupted from behind the smoke. Bullets shredded the exact route the Marines had planned to use. Rocks exploded into fragments. Dust filled the air. If they had advanced even 30 seconds earlier, half the team would have been cut down instantly. Sergeant Tom Brenner stared at Emma in disbelief. For the third time that day, she had seen danger before anyone else. But now even she looked worried. The enemy commander was smarter than they had imagined. Every move seemed calculated. Every trap led to another trap. It felt as if he had been thinking several steps ahead from the very beginning. Then a radio transmission suddenly broke through the static. It came from headquarters. Air support was finally on the way, but there was a problem. The helicopters were still 25 minutes out. 25 minutes might as well have been 25 hours. The enemy was already reorganizing for a full assault. Through her binoculars, Emma watched dozens of fighters forming attack groups around the armored vehicles. They weren't retreating, they were preparing to finish the Marines once and for all. Then she noticed something else. The commander on the ridge was moving. For the first time all day, he was leaving his observation point. But he wasn't running away. He was heading toward a narrow pass on the eastern side of the mountain, a route that led directly behind the Marines' position.
Emma's heart raced. Suddenly, everything made sense. The battle in front of them was another distraction. The commander wasn't planning to attack from the front. He intended to slip behind the Marines with a small strike team and kill Captain Reeves personally while the main force kept everyone occupied. It was the perfect plan. The enemy commander had been hunting Reeves from the start. This operation had never been about destroying the unit. It was about revenge. "Captain," Emma said quietly, never taking her eyes off the distant ridge, "he's coming for you himself." Reeves looked through his scope and finally spotted the small group moving through the eastern pass. There were only 6 men with the commander. 6 highly trained operators moving much faster than the others. They weren't ordinary fighters, they were professionals. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Captain Reeves loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle and looked at his team. "Get ready," he said, "because this ends tonight."
The sun was disappearing behind the mountains of Nevada when the final battle began. Long shadows stretched across the rocky terrain as Captain Michael Reeves and his Marines prepared for one last fight. The enemy's main force was advancing from the front, but Emma Collins barely paid attention to them anymore. Her eyes remained fixed on the eastern pass, where the mysterious commander and his small strike team had disappeared. Everything finally made sense. The ambush, the explosives, the fuel depot, the hidden army, it had all been designed to force Reeves into a position where he could be isolated and killed. This wasn't a military operation, it was personal revenge. The commander had spent months planning it, and now he was moving in for the final blow. "He's less than a mile away," Emma reported quietly, studying the terrain through her binoculars. 6 men, moving fast. They're using the dry riverbed for cover. Captain Reeves immediately divided the team. Half of the Marines would hold off the enemy assault force. The rest would move with him to intercept the strike team before they reached the rear of their position. Sergeant Tom Brenner volunteered without hesitation. Only days earlier he had laughed at Emma. Now he trusted her judgment more than his own. As the Marines repositioned, gunfire erupted across the valley. The enemy's main force launched a full attack. Machine guns roared, bullets slammed into rocks, smoke and dust filled the air. The battle had reached its climax, but Emma remained focused on the pass. Then she noticed something strange. The commander wasn't heading toward Reeves anymore. He was heading toward her. A chill ran down her spine. For hours, she had assumed Captain Reeves was the target, but the commander had adapted. He had watched her destroy the fuel depot, expose the hidden forces, and ruin every stage of his operation. He no longer viewed Reeves as the greatest threat. He wanted Emma. The realization hit her like a punch. "Captain!" she shouted into the radio. "He's changed direction! He's coming after me!" For a moment, silence filled the channel. Then, Reeves responded. "Hold your position. We're moving." But Emma already knew they wouldn't make it in time. The strike team was too close. She quickly moved higher along the ridge, taking position behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the pass. Minutes later, she spotted them. 6 men moving with military precision. At their center was the commander himself. Even from a distance, she could recognize his confident posture. He wasn't hiding anymore. He believed he had already won. The first shot came from below. A bullet smashed into the rock beside Emma's head. The hunt had begun. She immediately rolled into cover and returned fire. One of the attackers dropped. The others spread out instantly, moving from rock to rock. These weren't ordinary fighters. They were professionals. Every move was disciplined. Every position was calculated. For nearly 10 minutes, Emma fought alone. She changed locations repeatedly, refusing to stay still. Twice, enemy bullets came within inches of her. Once, a round tore through her sleeve. Another shattered her binoculars. Yet somehow, she remained calm. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When everyone else panics, that's when you think." Then she saw it. A tiny movement. The commander had made a mistake. For the first time all day, he was angry. Instead of waiting, he rushed forward to get a clear shot. Only a few seconds, only a small exposure, but it was enough. Emma adjusted her scope. The wind shifted slightly across the ridge. She waited, counted, calculated, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked across the mountains. The commander stopped, staggered, then collapsed onto the rocks. The remaining members of the strike team froze. Moments later, Captain Reeves and his Marines arrived from the opposite side of the pass. A brief firefight ended the battle. The surviving attackers surrendered. It was over. As darkness settled over the Nevada mountains, helicopters finally arrived overhead. The enemy force scattered. The ambush was finished. Marines moved among the wounded, securing the area and evacuating casualties. Later that night, while the team waited beside the landing zone, Sergeant Tom Brenner approached Emma. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said. "From the very beginning." Emma smiled tiredly and shook it. Captain Reeves watched the exchange and nodded. A week earlier, nobody had believed in her. Now dozens of Marines were alive because of her. As the helicopter lifted off and the mountains disappeared beneath them, Reeves looked at Emma sitting quietly by the window. Most people would remember her as the young Marine who saved the mission, but he knew the truth. Her greatest weapon had never been her rifle. It was her ability to see what everyone else missed. And that gift had saved an entire team from a trap that should have killed them all.